Hi, I'm Holland Webb,
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
and you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Well, the year is up, and this season of the Afterword podcast is on the books. It seems like a lot longer than 4 years ago since you sat down at the table at that old Mexican restaurant we used to go to and said, let's start a podcast. And what was it, 6 months later? We did.
We did. It was a lot of work, though, Holland.
It was a lot of work.
We had some good people to help us out. You know, we touched base with Britt Mooney and asked his advice on how to get podcasts started. And then voila, 4 seasons, 177 episodes, 10,500 downloads counting in 18 countries around the world. We've had 179 guests and guest hosts on our show. So it's really been an incredible journey. I do want to give a special shout out, though, to our wonderful digital director, Jonathan Wenrow, because there is no way when we sat down in that coffee shop with him and said, Jonathan, we don't know what we're doing. And he said, no problem. I've got this. And he has edited every single one of our 177 plus episodes. So special thanks to Jonathan Wenrow.
Yeah, I know a lot of other podcast hosts who really struggle to get regular content out because they have to do all the editing themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jonathan has made it possible for us to keep producing a new episode for more than 40 weeks a year.
Yeah. And, as we think about wrapping up this season of the Afterword, we're going to be talking about a lot of things that we've learned, but also things that we're grateful for. And so we just want to take a few minutes tonight and review the Afterword, if you will.
Well, Amy, you and I have our own personal stories that I don't think we've ever shared. So in just 60 seconds, would you mind sharing the Cliff Notes version of your life and who you are?
I really was not thinking this question was ever going to come to me, Holland. So thinking about 60 seconds and trying to put my life in a nutshell is just really hard. Our poor guests have just had to struggle with this Cliff Note thing. So I guess for me, 60 seconds is my love is learning and being with people. And so being an educator, getting to know other people and sharing those passions has been just a joy. And I am originally from Virginia and went to school at James Madison University and then got a master's at Clemson University. And it's just been a lot of fun. I love being outdoors and I love doing things with my family and am just grateful for all the connections made on the Afterword. How about you, Holland? 60 seconds, go.
You mentioned all those connections. We've probably made 175 new friends.
Absolutely.
Because of this. And some of them were people you knew before, but I got to know them. Some of them were people I knew before, but you got to know them. And I think we had one guest from the UK. This is, I'll get to my 60 seconds here, but we had one guest from the UK not long ago was trying to order food for friends in Greenville, where we live. And I said, I can do that for you. You don't have to do this whole, it's just funny how these little connections have happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But my Cliff Notes version of my life, I think travel and service have been 2 keys for me. I was born in a small town in rural Kentucky called Burkesville, and we traveled a lot, even when we lived there. And then we moved around a lot. I grew up in Missouri, Southwest Missouri, and then we lived in London for 3 months. We lived in the Philippines for 4 years. Moved to South Carolina. I've lived in Guatemala, Georgia, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Iowa, and for at least 6 months each. So been a lot of travel. I've enjoyed service. I spent 7 years working for Christian Blind Mission International. We had my former boss on, Alan Harkey, back when he was working for Feed the Children. And, he passed away just a few months after we recorded that episode. And then I had the chance to do some teaching, although I never dove into it as deeply as you did. I did spend 3 years there, and we got to interview one of my former students, Javier Mombila, who talked about the World Cup not long ago. Was a 5th grade student of mine, and his sister was a 7th grade student of mine. So, and now I just this year got married for the first time at age 45. So there's always a new adventure around the corner, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really fun because when I think about even when I met, people always ask us that oftentimes when our guests, after we've stopped recording, how did you two meet? Well, in a children's fiction writing class with 2 of our former guests.
Right.
We've had Melinda and Tim Davis, both on our Melinda Long and Tim Davis, both on our podcast as guests. And they were our former teachers in the class. So I do think that's kind of funny that we've had these wonderful, wonderful connections. It's very interesting when I think about this particular year, because for 4 years, for 4 seasons, we've been doing this podcast, and 3 of them basically have been in a pandemic. So
yes.
Every single one of our conversations swings back to, so how do you, do XYZ in a pandemic? So it's been very interesting to think about this particular year where people are starting to move out. And even our conversations this year has started to move a little bit away from that. Our conversation with Bill Martin and Chris Hennon on weather prediction, was so timely. And that's actually one of our most downloaded for this year. And then we had the accessibility in sports and our cyber safety conversation. So it's just so interesting how the year has evolved, if you will, and our topics. And we tried to look at trends, and I think we kind of hit it,
I think we did. I think we did. I think we got a lot of practical topics too. I mean, we experience weather every day. So that's something that I know I want to know more about because it affects what I do. And I think every day I remember Andrew, the Everyday Spy's advice on our cybersecurity episode, because the website is always saying to me, do you want cookies? Do you approve of cookies? Do you approve of limited cookies? Do you reject all? Do you approve all? And his words are in my mind, like, don't give them any more than you have to. So it's practical.
Absolutely. Yeah. Andrew Bustamante. It is funny because I updated my security protocol on my computer after that. And so now I have to go through lots of rigmarole to get my computer set up. And I'm kind of glad in some ways, but it was a fantastic conversation. It's a very relevant topic right now for sure. So, when I think about the topics that have been varied over this year, whether it's weather, sports, safety, money, human ingenuity, I have learned something from every single one of our guests. I think about the topics that we had on weather, and even the episode that we talked about with architecture and weather. That was fascinating.
Yes.
How a building could be built. And now when we just came through Hurricane Ian and you looked at those homes that had been built for weather that were able to withstand it, man, that's a really relevant conversation.
It sure was. It sure was. And I still want to do that road trip to Alabama and Mississippi to see the museums honoring the Tuskegee Airmen and the African-American people who've served in the military. That was a great episode.
Absolutely.
And the World Cup. I mean, I know I'm going to watch the World Cup. I am watching the World Cup differently, with a lot more insight into what's actually happening and what's going on behind those teams than I would have if we had never recorded that episode.
I couldn't agree with you more. And remember when we were doing that episode with the curator from the African American History Museum, and that was such a powerful episode. And they were telling us about the movie Devotion.
Yes.
That was the movie that was talking about the hero from this wonderful opportunity where they were an African American fighter pilot, and they were sent in. And so this is the true story, and that's coming out November 23rd of 2022. So if people are listening to this episode later, they need to go check out that movie, Devotion.
Sounds good.
Yes.
I didn't realize that was coming out.
Yep. Have to be excited about that. I'm very excited about this opportunity that we've had, Holland. So I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
What is an essential element that we need to know when we think about stories and podcasting?
We got that question. You remember where we got these questions from? Our
Yes.
2 questions?
You did.
I got them from Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
The essential element and the metaphor. The essential element to podcasting stories, in my view, is the guests.
Yep.
I don't think it's the questions. I don't think it's the hosts, fascinating as we may be. I think it's the guests, because they are the experts and it's their personalities that come through. And sometimes we can ask a question and expect an answer one way, and it comes in totally different than what we thought. And it's just because that's what they know and that's what they live and breathe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really is. All right. I have a question for you then.
Okay.
What's a metaphor that you connected with from our guests?
Goodness, we had some really amazing metaphors over these 4 seasons. And I think it was rather funny. At the beginning, when we first did this 4 years ago, almost every single one of our metaphors was a gardening metaphor. Remember, we would laugh. We would almost predict it.
Right.
But there's a lot of truth to this. There's a lot of elements to gardening and nature that people can connect with. But we did an episode, and it was on fashion, and this was with a guest that you knew. And then the 3 girls I knew from Sunny's Boutique, I knew with my daughter, and their metaphor on how fashion is different was a silent disco. And I'm like, I have never heard of that before.
Right.
That was so clever and so spot on. And it was so sweet to watch them really take these questions and dig into this. And they were so serious about really researching their answers and that kind of thing. I just thought that was beautiful. But I think for me, my metaphor with podcasting is that, and I guess I would have to go back to your idea with the guests. I would think that's absolutely spot on. But I'm going to go back to the garden. I'm going to pull it out again. I feel like podcasting is like sending out multiple root systems within a network of trees. Our guests may be a tree in one section of the forest, but they've sent out root systems with their conversations, and they get connected. And the most beautiful things that I got to watch with our guests is when we had 2 guests who did not know each other. And after our conversation, they're like, oh my goodness, I need your contact information because we need to collaborate. And that was just such a sweet thing. So for me, podcasting is just developing those wonderful, strong networks of humans together. So that's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, I want to say a special thanks to all our listeners and subscribers. You can find all 4 seasons of our conversations on the afterwordpodcast.com. You can become a subscriber to our podcast there and leave us a review and tell all your friends about us. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.